How's it going, Star Seekers? My name's Got Cake, and in this review we're going to be taking a look at a game that I've been meaning to review for a while, The Eternal Castle Remastered. Although the title suggests that the game is a remastered version of a long-lost 1987 game, it's believed that this backstory is also purely a work of fiction. So The Eternal Castle is an action platformer where you take control of a male or female protagonist, and your mission is to investigate why a scavenger unit has lost communication with a space station in orbit above the now desolated Earth. Now, if you've ever played Another World, Flashback, or the original Prince of Persia, then the game's format and gameplay will be familiar to you, and if you haven't played these games, I highly suggest you do. So as we begin a new game and select a save slot, a wall of difficult to read text briefs us on the game's backstory, and then we get to select between two characters, Adam or Eve. Now, the game doesn't tell you this, but as far as I'm aware, Adam has more strength and resistance, while Eve has better aim, more stamina, and is more stealthy. Following our selection, we see our character waking up and hopping into the driver's seat of the ship. Upon entering the atmosphere, the ship is shot down, and as the game opens we find our character suspended from a tree. Now, this first portion of the game acts like a short tutorial. We learn that we move by using our left analog stick or D-pad, and the B button allows us to jump, and we can use it to climb up ledges and jump across gaps like this one. We next learn that the Y or ZR button performs a melee attack, and we get to break a couple of pallets before climbing the ladder. Dropping down from the wall, we find our first ranged weapon, a pistol, and after picking this up with the action button, we can then aim it using ZL and fire using ZR. After proceeding through the now open door, we enter an abandoned complex littered with corpses, and this kinda sets the tone for the whole game. The Eternal Castle takes place on a very dark, hostile planet Earth, where dangers lie around every corner and death is only one wrong move away. Now, continuing onwards, we find a note which talks about some beast being turned on using materials from a crashed glider, presumably ours, and so we make locating the glider our first objective. Along the way we encounter a symbol which we can sit next to and meditate, and these symbols act as the game's checkpoints. In the top left we have several bars, and the top red one is our health, the blue one below this is our stamina, and below that is the ammo count for the range weapon that you're currently carrying. If at any point you lose all your health and die, and trust me you will in your first playthrough, then the game will resume from your last checkpoint. So as you make your way through this first tutorial area, you'll get a feel for the game's controls and mechanics. There's quite a heavy focus on trial and error in the game, and you'll often have to die several times before you manage to pass certain areas. You'll encounter many different enemies and traps through your playthrough, each presenting their own challenge and solution. There are often multiple solutions or routes through sections of the game, and it's left to you, the player, to make a decision on how to approach each situation. Here is a prime example. Do you drop this engine on the bandit's head and splatter him? Or simply shoot him in the face? So at the end of the tutorial section we encounter the aforementioned beast, and one of several boss battles in the game commences. We enter into hand-to-hand combat with it, and after a short scuffle emerge victorious, retrieving the glider fragment used to power it. We then find our crashed glider, and so begins the game proper. From this point onward we receive a teleporter and the game branches out. Now, our glider, having been damaged, has lost 3 of its power fragments in 3 different locations which are accessible from our glider's map. We need to retrieve all 3 before we can travel to the Eternal Castle, and these areas can be completed in any order. If you begin an area and decide you want to play a different one, then you can teleport back to your ship by selecting it in the options menu. You will, however, lose all your progress in an area, and when you return to it you'll have to begin it again from the start. So each of these areas provides a distinctly different gameplay experience. The first of these is the Lost City, which takes place in an arid desert-like terrain. Gameplay in this area is focused more around ranged combat, with various firearms including pistols, rifles and machine guns. We also encounter 2 warring factions in this area, and have to battle our way through them to locate the ship's fragment. The second area we can visit is the Unholy Church, where we find a shotgun up on arrival and have to make our way through this swamp-like area filled with these black inhuman creatures. We eventually stumble across an abandoned property and discover the sinister truth about the origins of the creatures. This second area is the darkest of the 3, and its gameplay feels a bit like a survival horror game. The final area is the ancient ruins, where we find a savage tribe of people who become hostile the moment they spot us. We have to make our way through the ruins of a city where we find very few firearms, and instead combat is more melee focused. We can acquire several different melee weapons, including hammers, hatchets, and my personal favourite, this massive mace, which I put to good use by pummeling unarmed tribesmen to death with it. Further into the level we encounter a trap-riddled area, which I found very reminiscent of Prince of Persia. So as we play through these areas, the game strikes a good balance between exploration and combat, and as stated before, there are multiple routes through several areas, allowing you to avoid combat altogether in some situations. Now you can choose to just work your way through levels taking a direct route from start to finish, but the game encourages you to explore, and doing so will reward you. You can find several different equipable items which aid you in various ways, from increasing your stamina recharge rate to allowing more ammo for firearms to be carried. You'll also find these tiny sparkling dots which are fragments. There are 30 of them in total to find throughout the game's 5 levels, and finding all 30 will reward you with the game's secret ending. Once you complete the game once, you unlock New Game Plus, which gives you a single life to complete the game again with and unlocks new dialogue. In addition to New Game Plus, you also unlock Lost Tales, which features 2 additional game modes. Firstly, there is Sacrifice, which appears to take place after the events of the main game and sees you revisiting the memories of a tribal warrior. And secondly, there is Duel, which lets you face off against a second player or an AI opponent in 1v1 hand-to-hand combat in one of 2 arenas. So I think that I've covered all the general gameplay aspects of the Eternal Castle, so I'll now talk about my gameplay experience and opinions of the game. To begin with, I want to say that I absolutely loved the game's visuals. I was constantly in awe at how detailed environments and enemies appeared, despite there only ever being 4 colours used in any part of the game. This choice of visual aesthetics also went a long way in giving the game a true retro vibe, and the choice to use an 80s retro wave inspired soundtrack was also a fantastic decision. While we're on the topic of audio, for the most part the game's audio was good, but for some reasons there were issues with it breaking up with constant crackling sounds in certain areas. This was especially apparent in the Lost City zone. When it comes to gameplay, I found the game very enjoyable for the most part. Each area's environments require you to adopt a different style of gameplay, and this kept things fresh throughout my playthrough. The way the game frequently transitioned between combat, platforming and trap-filled areas provided some good variety to the gameplay. Now the controls for the game can be a bit fiddly until you get used to them, and the L button will become your best friend. Holding this will cause you to walk, often saving you from stepping off ledges and falling to your death. Now when it comes to the game's combat, I felt there were some issues here. Firstly, the ranged combat often felt a little luck based, as you can only fire in a straight line, and I often felt like just firing at random across the screen was just as effective as using cover and taking coordinated timed shots at enemies. With melee combat it was much the same story. The game doesn't really tell you a lot about melee combat, but there's actually quite a bit of depth to it. You can get into a fighting stance by holding ZR and perform different attacks while standing or crouching, and each attack drains some of your stamina, and when it's fully drained you'll attack slower. You can also block by holding the B button, which will reduce the damage you take from enemy attacks. Despite these mechanics though, you basically end up resorting to mashing buttons whenever you get into a fight, and melee combat ends up feeling chaotic and also luck based in many instances. So now I'll come to my main issues with the game, which all revolve around bugs or exploits that I found whilst playing. Now I often go out my way to try and break games when I play them, but breaking the Eternal Castle was surprisingly easy. We'll start with the enemy AI, which didn't necessarily involve any breaking, more exploiting the stupidity of it. I found AI in the game wasn't great on occasions, and I was often able to avoid fights by just making the enemies jump off ledges, including in the sub-boss fight seen here. The next 2 exploits I found are likely to be a speedrunner's wet dream. The first one allowed me to kill several bosses in a couple of hits, which I don't believe is the intended way of defeating them. And the second allowed me to pass through any wall or locked door. This allowed me to bypass any area where I was required to pull switches to open doors, and also allowed me to skip entire sections of levels. Now these things don't really ruin the gameplay experience, but do just highlight a certain lack of QA testing and leave the game feeling a little rough around the edges. So now we come to rating the game. Now I rate games between 1 and 5 stars, with the shovelware stamp of approval reserved for the worst games on the eShop. This rating is based on my own personal opinion on what a game has to offer in terms of gameplay and value for money to potential buyers. And for a rating I'd give the Eternal Castle Remastered 3 out of 5 stars. On the whole, the game provides a great gameplay experience and is a must play for fans of Another World and Flashback, and its outstanding visual design is unlike anything I've experienced before and was one of the game's main highlights. While the game is relatively short, clocking in at around 4 or 5 hours for the average player, New Game Plus and Sacrifice provide additional playtime, and I personally enjoyed every minute that I spent immersed in the game's beautifully crafted dystopian world. Finally, I just want to say, don't let the AI and exploits that I've highlighted in this review deter you from playing the game. I highly recommend you give it a go, especially if you like action platformers. Now, as it currently stands, the game has temporarily been removed from the Switch eStores due to issues with its age ratings, but it was showing at $14.99 on the US eShop, and it should be back on soon and available for a similar price on the UK eShop. If however you can't wait to play it and have a PC, then the game is also available on Steam. And that's it for this review of the Eternal Castle Remastered. Drop a like if you enjoyed it and let me know what you thought about it in the comments section down below. And as always, consider subscribing to the channel for more Switch indie game reviews which I upload every few days. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, game on.